It's really important for them to look into institutions that they rely on and see people that look like them so they can see that they're represented.
Welcome to the Global Indian Podcast, the world's greatest journey and the official platform for people of Indian origin. Because let's face it, we are everywhere. My name is Rajan, and on our weekly show, we plunge into the human experience of being a person of Indian origin, take a closer look at the countries we now call home, and tackle the issues you need to know more about. This is the world's greatest journey that will ultimately change the way you see the notion of Indianness to be, and importantly, our connection to each other. Every week, the team and I are joined by our guests, where we have open conversations about the 50 shades of brown that is our experience, and take a closer look at the issues close to their hearts. In this episode, we've taken a conversation all the way back into the UK. It's with a fantastic individual, Ranjit Singh Dole. He's a senior police officer, served for over 22 years. And I suppose it's even more pertinent considering everything that we're going through globally. We have got the rise in the counter-terrorism. We've been seeing obviously the COVID situation and having a look at isolation and breaking up parties, communities that are together. It had a huge impact on weddings, funerals, so on and so forth. We've seen obviously Black Lives Matter protests that have taken place, as tearing down the statues, but also seeing a lot of antisocial behavior coming up, anti-police sentiment. So this conversation is like none other. It's incredibly relevant. It tackles on the biggest situations and the issues at face, but more so through the eyes of a performing police officer, who in most cases people consider to be caught in the middle. He's a person that makes up the ethnic minority of the UK. He's a person of Indian origin, but at the same time he's doing what he feels right to serve the greater, wider community. I think what you'll find is a remarkable conversation that is going to plug into a whole range of issues, but more importantly delves into the human experience of the profession, of the uniform, and the identity of a person, seeing how it all marries together. I hope you enjoyed this session, and like always, these podcasts have been proudly supported by our dear friends at shareme.com, the app for all your beauty, fitness, and wellness needs. If you'd like to know more about the Global Indian series, you can find out more at the end of the podcast.
And just move. Get up 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 and just.
Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Because this is a highly interesting podcast for the very fact that it's everything that's taking place right now in the UK, worldwide, especially in the US. And that's why I thought your voice would be vital for this.
Well, first of all, Rajan, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this podcast and sort of share my views around how things are today in society. I'm Ranjit Singh Dole. I'm privileged to be a temporary superintendent within the Derbyshire Constabulary. It's a service that I've aspired to joining since a very young age, so I'm really sort of pleased and privileged to be supporting and serving my communities. I've served within Derbyshire, not all of my service actually, I've altogether within the police service I've served 22 years. My journey started as a special constable, as a volunteer in Derbyshire, because my drive was so strong in terms of being a police officer. So I jumped in as a special constable, and then I moved to Northamptonshire to start my regular policing career. And I had 3 years in Northamptonshire where they absolutely looked after me. My sergeant was like my second dad. My tutor constable was like my brother. The rest of the team were like my brothers and sisters, and we had a great start to my career. And then I missed my home cooking. I missed mum. And I needed to serve my communities, the communities that I've grown up in, the streets that I've enjoyed as a young kid, and the open spaces where I've played and grown, and I wanted to serve those communities, and that's why I decided to come back.
So what's it like to be you? I suppose that's the thing right now. everybody would know whichever country they're in. We've seen the riots that have kicked off across the US. We've seen what's taking place in the UK. And what started off to be seen as an anti-racist riot seems quite steadily growing into an anti-police riot. And there's you in the middle of it all in Derby with the hat that you have, with the dadi, with a beard, with your pug. You're obviously ethnic minority group. Do people see the uniform before they see you? Do they realize that you're also making up that portion of society that feels quite hurt?
Yes, I think that's a really interesting concept actually, and I think your views will sort of change dependent on your service and your experience. Now, when I first sort of joined the service, I certainly felt, and the narrative around you was that don't take things personal. People see the uniform, they're reacting to the uniform, and you sort of grow up with that sort of mentality that, you know, it's the uniform that they're attacking and it's not yourself. But then, dependent on your experiences, you know, you feel different things and you experience, you know, discrimination, racism on the streets in the heat of a situation, and you sort of go with that. But as you know, time has gone on and you become wiser, and you start to grow with your experience, you feel that being you is the most important aspect of being a police officer. It's really important to show who you are as a person, because I try to operate, well, I do operate in line with my personal values, and those values are actually in correlation with our policing values. So if you can, what I try to do is I try to just celebrate who I am, and I try to think and make decisions and act the way I'm wired up, because I'm 100% confident that my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are in sync with the constabulary's feelings and beliefs. So I try to be authentic, and I think that's really important, to deliver that authenticity in everything that you do. And that's what actually connects with people. And people see who you are, and they see that what you're trying to do, you're trying to do that for the best of everybody. So I think that's the key ingredient. That's the glue that actually connects people, and that brings about.
But do people see that? Because you're saying I need to have congruence in my life, and you're a police officer because it fits hand in hand with what your values are. You're out there to make a difference, be a social custodian. But at times like this, where you start to see what's taking place in London as well as across the UK, across the globe, do people take time, in your opinion, to stop and to look and say, okay, this guy is somebody that's like me, that grew up around here, that's trying to do the best that they can do to serve their community. They just happen to wear a uniform to do that.
Yeah, I think people that know you and people that have perhaps, you know, conversed with you over time, they will see that because they understand you and they've got that connection with you. But in the wider sense, you know, people will see you as a person in uniform, and you may be sort of covered with their thoughts, their wider thoughts, or tarnished with the same brush. You know, if there is disparity, if there's concern in that person's mind, they'll see the uniform, and you're sort of wrapped up within their thoughts. So I think what's really important at this time, against the backdrop of, you know, what's happening with Black Lives Matter, and also the trauma that's being caused within our communities around the counter-terrorism situation, and such like, and everything, put all that together, I think what's really important now is for communities to see role models. It's really important for them to look into institutions that they rely on and see people that look like them, so they can see that they're represented. And by just purely looking into those institutions and seeing folk that look like them, it gives them trust and confidence. And I think this is what's required, that trust and confidence. And then the next step is that the police service, you know, want our communities to be able to have that voice. You know, they want to be heard, they want to be seen, they want to be listened to, and most importantly, I think, they want to be understood. And if they can see people that look like them, they have that confidence that, well, actually, that service understands us because we can see ourselves in there.
But what's been the disconnect though? Because this has been an ongoing conversation since the 70s and 80s. That's a long time for things to not have changed the way that it should have been. Is it a lack of will or is it a lack of know-how on both sides? What's caused this delay?
I think a number of things. My personal views are that the police service, and having grown up in the police service for 22 years, we are very traditional in how we operate and how we move. And I think society has changed rapidly. You know, during my time, the service looked completely different when I first joined, but also society was completely different. And as society has changed so rapidly over the last just 5-10 years, we have to ask ourselves, has the police service, in terms of our engagement, have we evolved with society? And in some ways we have, but in many ways we haven't. And the biggest area where we haven't is look into police services, look into police forces, and do they look the same as our communities? Do the police service represent the communities that they serve? And unfortunately, we don't. We don't represent that same diversity that we have in our resident population. And I think that's where a lot of the disconnect comes from, because it's that lack of understanding, it's that lack of empathy, it's that lack of sensitivity. So that is absent, or it's not as strong in our operational delivery. So when the service lands on the street, does it truly understand the people that it's serving? That, I think that's a big gap. And that's why there's been a huge emphasis in trying to recruit and enrich our organizations with that excellence, with that difference, so that we have that cultural competence in terms of serving our communities. That's a big gap. And then meaningful engagement. And I talk about this quite a lot in terms of what does meaningful engagement look like? And you hear the term, certainly in many industries, that those hard to reach communities. I don't like that term at all, because they're not hard to reach. It's that we don't know how to reach them. That's the issue for me. And we have to have the skill and expertise and that cultural competence in order to reach those communities. And another big thing for me is just speaking very sort of openly, very simple, is that the police turn up when it's gone wrong. When there's issues, when there's a call for service, that's when the police arrive, and that's when we engage with our communities. We will contact our communities and get involved when we actually need something. So the police only arrive when we need something, when we need to sort things out and whatever, or we need to mitigate and dissolve things. I think the police have to be there when it's not kicking off, so to speak. And I think that's meaningful engagement, where we are there in everyday life. We are conversing with our communities in everyday normal life. That's how I feel that one can galvanize those relationships and really have that meaningful engagement and that understanding.
So what has to happen for that to change then? Because I can only come back to right now when I have a look at the stuff on social media, and when one has a look at what's taking place in the US, it awfully feels like it is a us v them, and them is the establishment. But what you're saying is, no, look, we are part and parcel of society together. We're working together. But again, the question will have to come back, why has it not changed enough? I know that there's a recent report done that we spoke about before about issues within the institution itself, about diversity. Surely it can't take this long, Ranjit.
Yes, I think this is a frustration that's followed by many people within the organisation, internally, externally. But what I can say is that there is a real, sincere and genuine desire from the government, from within the high echelons of the police service, to actually make some meaningful change. There's various different strategies, there are various different toolkits to support on the ground level in terms of encouraging people, supporting people into the organisation. There's different routes into the organisation now. We're trying to professionalise the service, similar to what the government did with nursing, trying to bring people in, and see the service as a professional service, so that it's one of those top shelf services that you can put alongside your doctors, lawyers, solicitors, pharmacists, etc. So a lot of work is being done to attract those people, who have that sort of forward-thinking academic understanding in terms of shaping and enriching our organisation, so that we understand the threats and risks, not only of today, but in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because that threat and risk looks different. But it's going to be a long haul in terms of building that trust and confidence, because people's experiences are not always their own personal experiences. It's years and years and generations of hearing, how the police service hasn't, provided a proper service to different communities, and it's trying to break through that, and it's going to take time. But what people, I think, need to see is role models.
Well, I was going to say, have you, on the issue of role models, but coming back to it, have you ever suffered racism as a police officer from within and outside of the force?
Okay, I think the term racism is a very strong term, and I think there's various different sort of meanings of racism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely, there's discrimination within all society. We as police officers, or in any industry, we are first and foremost members of society. We're members of our community, and then we step into our professional life. And it's those members of the community, members of society, that actually bring that discrimination, that prejudice, in sometimes, that racism, it does enter into our workplace. So yes, there has been instances. Have I directly faced any racism? No, I haven't, and I'm very fortunate to. But what I will also say is that certainly in my early years, I think my naivety actually protected me, because a lot of things would go straight over my head. Of protection, because if you don't know, it doesn't eat you, it doesn't bite you.
Absolutely.
When you look back and you reflect and you think, actually, was I sidestepped with that one? Was that a direct dig at me? It probably was, it probably wasn't. But my naivety actually has allowed me to sort of cleanse and just concentrate on being the best person that I possibly can be, and to benefit the people around me. So in that respect, yes, it's helped and supported, but there is discrimination, and we are trying our really best in terms of trying to tackle subconscious bias, trying to educate. That's why it's so important to bring people in from all communities to serve, because not only does that flow into our operational delivery, but also internally, so that we educate and we learn and we understand.
Absolutely.
Understanding, not just on the ground level, but it's got to vibrate through the whole level of the organisation. And I think COVID-19 has been a massive leveler. It's been a massive learning experience for us, because we've seen that, certainly I speak on behalf of Derbyshire, our attitude and response to COVID-19 has been absolutely first class. But what it has identified, and I'm sure this is the same for many organisations, is that lack of understanding of our communities, because our communities have been faced with the worst thing that they can ever be faced with, and that's people dying, death.
Yeah.
Been dying at a very fast rate, and that's had an impact on their faith, how they can observe funerals and such like. And having that knowledge and understanding is really important, because when communities are suffering, the police, it's our role to be there to protect them and to understand and support them. But if we don't have knowledge and understanding, and it's that knowledge and understanding, or lack of, that generates hesitancy. And it's that hesitancy that impacts on trust and confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it must be really, well, I can only imagine it would be so difficult to be you, because you're on the front line, you're serving your community, you got things are issued from the government, obviously COVID, the funeral issues, you're keeping people in the bubble. And yet there's an expectation from communities, I suppose, saying, well, look, you're one of us. Surely you should be helping us. Do you ever find that in a really weird way that the most difficult part of your job is actually within our own communities rather than that outside? Because there is an expectation that you look like us, so therefore you understand us, and come on, do somebody a favor type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a different expectation on yourself from your own personal community, and I think that comes out of a number of things: loyalty,
Yeah.
respect, um, uh, and and a whole host of things. And I think the most important and the most biggest challenge for me has been maintaining, well, not maintaining my values, but in actually saying no, and relaying that I'm not prepared to sacrifice my values for anything, and sometimes that message, when it falls within your community, it's a difficult message to absorb by our communities. But in the passage of time, people respect you for what you're doing. So, I had the privilege of being the inspector in the area that I grew up. So I was responsible for policing in the area which I grew up. And I had ready-made contacts, the people that I was working with on a day-to-day basis from different partners or people that I've grown up with, and people that I've known. And, my parents have been in business in Derbyshire, as long as I can remember. And they obviously have their own networks and, people sort of, it's a very tight-knit community. Everybody knows everybody. So it was a challenge actually to stick to your guns, which I always will do, but sometimes managing that sort of fallout, and to be honest with you, in a very nice way, my biggest learning has been learning how to be unpopular. Decisions, you sometimes for a period of time you become unpopular.
Yeah.
Because he's not doing what we want him to do. And it's dealing with that feeling of being unpopular, because everybody wants to be nice, everybody wants to feel that you're having a positive impact with folk, and that sort of feeling of, yes, he's really good, he's really nice, that drives you and it gives you great satisfaction. But when you're making decisions, the right decisions, because I will never ever favor one community over another. The first thing that comes into my mind when I was sworn in as a police officer, and the words have stayed with me, is without fear or favor. And that's part of your attestation. Without, you will serve without fear or favor. So my loyalty is to my attestation. So I must serve without fear or favor. And it's very hard sometimes to be pulled into one side, but then you have to be true. And some really fantastic advice that I was given by actually an ex-police officer who was in charge within West Midlands Police at the time of the Handsworth riots, David Webb. He was the chief superintendent. He's a very close family friend of ours, and David actually said to me, he said, Ranjit, the minute you favour one community over another, your credibility is lost. Pack your bags and go home.
Yeah.
So that's really important for me to maintain that level thinking and never ever compromise my values. And
But
sometimes,
coming on that though, it's what are your biggest fears? Because we're now entering a time that is unknown to anybody. We have obviously the COVID, but then you have the rise in domestic threats such as terrorism that we've seen. We've seen the grooming scandals that have taken place across the UK. And on top of that, now we're seeing the changing turn of how people are viewing the police force. Do you have fears that were never there before? Have they almost emerged in because of the changing times that we're here?
yes, I do, and I think that's largely because I'm more informed now. As time has gone on, you become experienced, you're more informed. But what I am very clear about in my mind is that this is not something that the police can solve by themselves. This is something that's going to require buy-in and support from all aspects of society, education, health services. The whole shebang needs to come together. And I think what we're seeing is that many people feel let down by mainstream services. They feel let down by that understanding of them. And I think the Black Lives movement is actually spelling things out for us very clearly, if we choose to understand what's being said. Because it's actually disappointed me when we've sort of seen in the media and various people speaking where, we have the Black Lives Matter banner, and people will say, well, every life matters. All lives matter. Of course they do. Every life does matter, but I think that's the surface view. The surface view is every life matters. Of course it does. But let's just look at what Black Lives Matter is saying and why it's saying it. What it's saying is that being a black person in society today that experience is completely different to being a white person in society today. That's what it's saying. That's because against the backdrop of disparity, against lack of opportunity, against discrimination, all of these things that an oppression that's happened over years and years, Black Lives Matter is saying that it's different. Being a black person in society is completely different to being a white person because of these issues and these reasons that are ingrained from generation to generation. And why are they saying Black Lives Matter? For me, it's because it's a cry for help. Help us. We are seen as second rate. Help us. Support us. We need your help. We need your support. We need your understanding. We need change. And that message is not just to the police service. That message is to everybody. It's to everybody. We feel oppressed. We feel pushed. Look at what's happening. The actions of 2-3 police officers in America, it's their actions within a 5-minute window.
Yeah.
Has vibrated across the whole world, and people feel really strongly about this. And I think, I wouldn't say they're fears, but the challenge for me and what I want to see is I want to see people stepping forward, role models stepping out and saying, look, we actually understand you. We hear you, we understand you, and we want to work with you to make things better. And I think it's that genuine, sincere approach that we need to demonstrate now as a country and as a nation and as a world, to be honest.
It's interesting. I suppose it's always fascinating to hear people's thoughts about that, like the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I get it. When you read it in the sense of saying it's a cry out for help, we need support, we need help. And yes, if we're going to use this as almost a tool to say, actually, we need to now address all the inequalities in society, then this is a moment for that. But if it would be hijacked by almost saying it's only racism or only a bias that goes towards a particular grouping, then I think we're losing the plot altogether. Because you would have heard in the previous podcast about what's happening in South Africa, what's taking place there, or in Guyana. And you think, well, there's so much injustice out there. I suppose even for yourself though, like, is there an uncertainty that almost is shrouded around you in that sense of people's perception of the police force have been massively pushed to the limits because of what happened in the US? If we talk about the elephant in the room, police are like this. This is what they do. They attack us. They don't like the common person. And there's in the middle of it all saying, no, guys, this is all of us. We're not policing against you. We're policing for you. We're saying everybody has to take that value, saying, as an individual, I'm a social custodian in my own life. And as a police force, we're here to be there for the good and the bad, but together. But it must be scary though, Ranjit, surely. Or is it just different in Derby as it is compared to other parts of the UK?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand that the relationship between our communities and the police is different to what it is in the US, or certainly in some parts of the US.
Yeah.
We have enjoyed some very, very good relationships up and down the country with our underrepresented groups, and it's important that we celebrate that and we work with that. So I think it's really important for us all not to sort of lose sight of the good work that's gone in the past, and the hard work that's been done to try to move things forward. Every service up and down the country, has got a real strong eye on some of the things that have caused issues in the past, such as stop search, hate crime. There's been a massive emphasis on, ensuring that the service that lands on the ground is one that doesn't discriminate. And there's been a lot of work being done around learning and development, and we involve our communities in those conversations through scrutiny panels and such like, so they can see that desire and that sort of change taking place. So, I think it's important for us to understand that there is very good relationships, but those relationships are strongly tested when certain things happen, such as the incident in America, which we're seeing everything playing out now. So I think from me, sat where I'm sat and seeing how things are unfolding, there is a lot of confusion in my mind, in that, my experiences of growing up and having the police, around me, I've only had very good experiences, because
Yeah.
I think in my family upbringing, the police weren't seen as the bad guys.
No.
The police were seen as, if you're in trouble, you go to the police. The police are there to help and protect us. And I didn't grow up with that sort of narrative of, the police have been bad and what have you. And I grew up with that ambition of actually being a part of the police service so I can serve my communities. And I think that's where I make the marriage of those police values of protecting, supporting, dealing with injustice. And they are exactly in tune with my faith values and my family values of, serving, seva in Sikhism, and that's the same thing. I see me being a police officer. This is my calling. I'm here to serve, and I want to serve at the very best level. That's what public service. You chop my arm off, and I'll bleed public service, because that's who I am, and that's what I am. And it does concern me. It does worry me. It does sadden me when I see all of this unfolding on the streets. Because I've not felt that oppression. I've not felt that bad feeling that other people clearly have. So, I just see it as my responsibility. And now that I'm, getting into positions where you can influence, you can persuade, that it's my duty to ensure that our people are understood. And it's my duty to ensure that we put measures and processes and procedures in place that don't discriminate, that actually are vehicles to bringing things to a professional, resolution.
I think, well, that's it. I think the fact that it is the right people in the right place that makes those changes. And I like what you said. It is, you're seeing the person before the uniform, because the uniform is just a personification of what your values are, what you feel, that beating heart, as you said, is seva for yourself. And then what happens in the US or happens in other countries, it's like every profession, you're going to have people that are good, the people that are bad, and people that are in the middle. And the reality is, you're just going out there every single day to actually bring communities together. Is not to police communities, but it's actually saying, let's work together. Let's actually enjoy this thing called being a human being. And regardless of whatever ethnicities or identity we place ourselves in, actually, let's make this area the best area that it can be. That's a very different way of thinking it. I think it's really exciting having people like yourself, Ranger, in the positions that you're in,
Yeah, thank you very much, Rajan. I think one of the key things that you've mentioned there, which has just sort of sparked something in my mind, is that the police have to be seen as not trying to control the community or trying to control society. We're here to support society. We're here to work with society. And I think it's really important for our communities, our public, to understand the day-to-day pressures that the police are under.
Yeah.
And it's having that two-way sort of dialogue. Understanding the pressures that the police service are under, and working with the police service and vice versa to try to overcome those and try to understand those. I think it's that understanding both ways that are going to bring us a lot more tighter and closer together. Like I've said before, we've enjoyed some very good relationships. Certainly, trying to increase representation within the service. Police forces up and down the country are putting a lot of investment into positive action, into encouraging underrepresented groups, and allocating mentors to people who are interested in joining the service, and really, putting a wraparound of services and highlighting to communities that, look, it's important that we have you in our service to police your communities and educate ourselves. And you know what? We really want the very best people. We only want the very best people, because it's the very best people that are going to provide the very, very best service. And that's what we want. And you know what? And we are starting to sort of see changes. You know, we are starting to get people, you know, within communities to actually, you know, pass that message on behalf of the police service. I think that's the sweet spot that we want to be in, where it's the police's messages are being actually passed on by the community themselves. You know, and I think that's where we're going to really penetrate those, you know, so-called hard to reach places. You know, that's where we're going to really penetrate that. But that's going to take time, you know, but sometimes the expectation is that we can flick a switch and suddenly everything's done. You can't flick a switch. You've got to get the infrastructure right. You've got to get the right people in the right places saying the right things because they mean it. Not, you know, not ticking boxes. It's got to be something that the organisation feels and means. And, you know, coming back to Derbyshire, you know, we're really pleased. You know, we've got our 3 priorities. You know, those priorities are, you know, providing excellent service, looking after our people, and optimising technology, you know, and bringing all of that together so that we provide that best service for our people, and being brave and being courageous in terms of moving away from some of the traditional things that we've done, you know, and you know, being modern in our approach, being modern in our thinking, you know, and accelerating that modern approach so that it fits today.
Yeah,
You know?
I like that. I like the fact that you've got this stable base in which you're working from, saying, well, you're not separate from society. The uniform doesn't separate you. If anything, it actually makes you almost an amalgamation of all the cultures around you. And that's something that probably hasn't sunk in that well with the communities out there. You know, it's but to end off, what's the one question you wish people would ask you from the general public about your role?
Yeah, that's a nice question. I think I just want people to know what it feels like being in the service. You know, it's a service that you know is progressive in its thinking. It's a service, you know, that comes from the right place. You know, I've got to say, you know, I've enjoyed, you know, 22 years as a regular police officer, and I wouldn't be sat here today if it wasn't for what I've learned within the police service, my home life, my hobbies, etc. I know it all comes together, but the police service has served me, and it's looked after me.
Yeah.
It's allowed me to grow. It's allowed me to do the things that I want to do and that serve my public. You know, and I'm indebted to the police service. That's the way I see it. You know, the police service has allowed me to influence. It's allowed me to serve. It's allowed me to build those relationships with our communities. And I think, you know, we've got a massive challenge ahead of us, and that challenge has to be met both ways. You know, it takes 2 to tango, so to speak. So we've got to get both sides to come together, and both sides have to show that energy and that desire and that intrinsic motivation to actually come together and you know, make it a better place, you know, for people to come enjoy that particular area, you know, and live together. You know, that's the area, that's where I want to be.
It sounds like you need to have the level steps to make things work. And yeah, absolutely. What a powerful conversation, especially for me. I think is really, really interesting. We kind of look at police officers globally now with the different vies, especially with what's taken place in the US. And I think one part of me, I do understand. And the second part, I think it's too easy to make these mass generalizations and stereotypes. And that can be incredibly detrimental for entire communities out there. And I think this conversation, for me at least, gives me that rest assurance that actually the police force are there. There are good people out there. They are people that are championing the common cause, that are making a difference. And it's not about policing us, but it's about policing for us. Because as Ranjit said, we always kind of reach out to police officers when times are bad. I think now we need to start changing that vision and making sure that they, as well as us, as citizens, are making those opportunities available to build those bridges even more so than ever. As promised, if you'd like to find out more about the Global Indian series, it is so easy. You can reach out to us guys via social media, so Instagram at the Nazrans or at the Global Indian series. If you are listening to this via YouTube, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment if you really like this. And that would be at the Global Indian series. And you can find the whole repertoire of conversations so far. If you want to listen to this via Facebook, really easy as well. If you go to Chutney Music on Facebook page and you can see the playlist Global Indian Podcasts, you can see we have over 68,000 people on that platform. So it is definitely growing in a really good way. And on the last part, if you're listening to this via Podbean, the official platform for the Global Indian series, all you have to do is check us out. It's globalindian.podbean.com. There again, you can find the entire repertoire. Now, the reality is we can't make this happen without your help. And your help can't be easier. All we ask you to simply do is share the stories, but also get involved in the stories. If you have a story that you want to share, make sure you reach out to us guys via the messaging services on any of those platforms. I'd love to hear from you because you too can be part of this living encyclopedia of the global Indian experience. Anyway, until we speak next week, I hope all remains well. Speak to you soon. Bye for now.